Good morning, everyone. We are here and we are live. We're so happy to see you this morning. And we're glad because we've got a special guest on our HFO camp. We're ramped up because we've usually been doing our live streams in the night. But we have woke up early. We've gotten our coffee and we are just elated to have this guest on today. See, we've got to get our times right, okay? So today we're stepping into a race that connects right here in Ohio all the way to Washington. We're joined by Don Leonard, candidate for the Ohio 15th Congressional District. Now, this is a seat that plays a role in shaping federal laws, everything from the economy to healthcare to how resources flow back into our communities. So this conversation isn't just about campaign. It's about what kind of leadership shows up for the people and what that looks like in real life. At Humanity First Ohio, we believe one thing: you can't participate in the system you don't understand. So today we're asking the questions, connecting the dots, and making sure you leave here informed, not overwhelmed. So we're going to get right into it. Don, thank you for being here this morning. The people are listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Peaches. It's a real pleasure.
Oh, we're happy to have you on this morning. Look at that smile. It's early and you're smiling already.
I got a 1-year-old daughter. I've been up for hours.
I get it. I totally understand. Well, we're glad to have you in the Situation Room this morning. And we're going to jump right in. We know your time is valuable. You're getting to your constituents and election day is among us. So we'll get right in. First, I have a question I want to ask. When I go to your website, I see a cool dog. I have got to know about your dog. I am a pet mom. And so I was like, I've got to ask him about that picture.
Yeah, my one-eyed mongrel named Jax. Well, somebody dumped him in Schiller Park in German Village, and we had a dog that had the same coloring as him, that black and tan brindle coat. And so we thought, oh, maybe that dog and our dog would look cute together. And our dog seems kind of lonely, so we adopted him, and they hated each other for about 7 years until they worked it out. But he's my dude. He's my one-eyed mongrel. We named him after my wife and I met in New Orleans. We were both teaching down there before we moved into Ohio. And there was this bar that had a great 80s night called One-Eyed Jack's. So we named him Jax after our favorite bar because he's got one eye.
I love it. I love it. I have 2 dogs, 2 Shih Tzus, and they're named after, I watched the Bridgerton. So I have Lady and I have Queen Charlotte. So those are my dogs. I'm a dog mom. I love that you're a dog dad. So yes. Well, you mentioned education. So we'll jump in. I want to ground people in who you are because your path here is unique. You've spent years in academia, including teaching, city, regional planning, the Ohio State University, right here in Ohio, helping shape how students understand communities, development, and policies. You've also had research connections to institutions like Princeton University and Cornell. See, we've done our homework. And you really are operating at a high level when it comes to studying systems and how they work. But at some point, something shifted, right? And so I'm curious, what did you see or maybe your experience that made you say, hey, studying systems is enough. I need to step inside the book. I need to step inside the story.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Peaches, and for that insight. Absolutely. My daughter was born on January 19th last year, and the very next day, Trump was inaugurated. OSU also won the football championship, so you win some, you lose some. But for about 3 weeks there, we were just huddled in at home, nursing our child. My wife was healing from childbirth, and we were just reveling in how fortunate we were to be able to make this beautiful baby girl. And then I went back to my classroom, and all hell was breaking loose. Trump was attacking top research universities like Ohio State because we had the audacity to allow students to show up and protest the genocide in Gaza. And then by February, they were deporting international students because they had shown up for those protests. And sometimes just grabbing them literally off the street and, hauling them off to some undisclosed location. So for my wife and I, it was just, really personal. This was happening in our place of work. By April, they were disappearing folks who didn't look, quote, American. Like you remember Abrego Garcia back in April. He was under a protective order from a federal judge, and they still whisked him off to some gulag in El Salvador. So, being a political scientist, I've seen this stuff in history books and read about it, and I've traveled and worked a lot in Latin America and seen dictatorship and democracy rise and fall down there. I just never thought it would happen in my own country. And then the real straw that broke the camel's back for me was when Mike Carey, the Republican representing our district right now, had the audacity not just to vote for Trump's big, beautiful bill, which includes $1 trillion of cuts to Medicaid. He bragged about it on the House floor in a speech, calling it deficit reduction for the financial health of our children. And if you know anything about my story, Peaches, that really, it pissed me off. I was raised by a single mom. And, we had some tough times. We had some good times. But in the recession in 1993, we were absolutely getting our butt kicked. She'd gotten laid off from work, and we were basically homeless, living out of the back of a pickup truck. And that was the year I had a bright idea at about 14 years old to crash my bike into the side of a wall and shatter my right wrist. It was only because of programs like Medicaid and food stamps that we were able to get back on our feet, and I was able to graduate high school. And, those safety nets plus public school teachers plus a lot of dumb luck basically explain how I was able to kind of get from homelessness to be able to, meet my wife and build my American dream.
The American dream, right? Yeah. I mean, and it's one thing to be taught. I have always been a political science history person. Matter of fact, in high school, people thought I was crazy because I took a honors world history, honors American history, and poli-sci all in the classes all in the same year, because that's just how driven I was to have more knowledge. But having knowledge about, we have people that aren't quite educated, and we at Humanity First Ohio, we do educate the community on how these things work. Those boring civics classes we didn't pay attention to. Now we need to have that information, and we're going to bring it to the people in a way that's relatable.
That's right.
But then you have the people like on my level who understand and have understood what our government and constitution says. So you had something very interesting happen to you at the No Kings rally. And I think it's important that we talk about this, because many people, the idea of exercising their rights, especially under the First Amendment right, can feel very intimidating or unclear. And you've come from a background where you've studied these systems, these laws, these policies, including your time at the OSU. So walk us through what happened, how you felt. And I think this is just important because I come across so many people like, whoa, we know this what the Constitution says, but I can't follow my Constitution. And it's like, what good is the Constitution if you are operating in it and can't use it? So I want to ease people's fears.
That's right. That's right. Well, and I think that should be the moral of the story is everything worked out well for us. The charges got dropped, and the police chief apologized to me. But at the moment, it was really scary. So, I woke up on, I guess it was March 28th was No Kings 3.0 day. I woke up, excited to do what I'd done during No Kings 2.0, almost exactly. I was invited by the folks who were organizing the German Village gathering, because my wife and I, been living here on the South Side for about 8 years. we got invited by them to show up and give a speech there. So we grabbed a bullhorn. I gave a speech. Council President Shannon Hardin gave a speech using the same bullhorn. Mark Segrist. We gave our speech there, and then my campaign packed up and headed down to Grove City for the 2 o'clock rally there to give a speech there, and then we were all going to be heading up to the State House for the 4 o'clock rally. Well, about an hour into the Grove City No Kings, I was invited by the organizers of the event to give a short speech. I jumped up on the back of a pickup truck tailgate, grabbed a bullhorn, and I was about 40 seconds into a 2-minute speech when all of a sudden this police cruiser appears out of nowhere and two cops, come pouring out of it, and basically indicated to me that I was violating a noise ordinance. And I said, okay, I understand that. Okay, here's the bullhorn. And they confiscated the bullhorn. They walked me over towards the cruiser and I complied. Then they said, let's go over here, and walked me over to the sidewalk. I complied. And they proceeded to explain to me that, I'd violated this noise ordinance, and, they wanted to know what's up. And I explained to them, listen, I'm a candidate for Congress. We're at a political rally, and I'm giving a speech about why we're here today and why it matters. And they asked for my ID. They went and ran my ID. They moved the cruisers down the street, and then they motioned me to leave the sort of the public area and go down by the cruisers. And by this point, I'd come to realize I had two police officers flanking me like I was under armed guard. And there was a third one trying to motion me down. I could hear more cruisers coming in the distance. And the whole thing started feeling like one of those, bad clips we sometimes see in the news. You know what I'm talking about, Peaches?
Yeah, I know. I've been there. And I'm going to be honest with you. I'm loud. I go to these rallies myself, and I could find myself very much in a situation the same. I went on the State House, okay, mm-hmm. on the front lawn and screamed. But I think that's what's important about this. As we speak today live, is your voice is so important and it matters. And for the everyday person watching, someone who might be afraid to speak up or show out, do you believe people should still feel safe to exercise their First Amendment rights today?
I would love to just say, heck yeah, get up, get loud, get proud. But let's be honest here. I'm coming from a place of privilege. I'm a white guy. I'm a college professor with that kind of, presentation. And up until this encounter, I've never gotten the heebie-jeebies when I've seen a police cruiser going by. That's just been, I would say, a little bit of my privilege. So, for me, when that officer motioned me to move away from the crowd, and I said, no, man, I'm all set. And then he ordered me to move away from the crowd towards that private area. And I said, I understand you're giving me an order. And he said, and you understand you're disobeying it? And I said, I understand that I'm out here exercising my First Amendment right. It takes some privilege to talk back to a police officer sometimes. And I don't want to minimize that. But at the same time, I will say this. The group of people that surrounded me, both physically during that encounter and in the weeks that followed, it was just absolutely heartening because we know that we were in the right. The legal director in Grove City knows that the police were way out of the line. The Grove City police chief, like I said, apologized to us. They know we're in the right. So it all worked out well in the end, but it never should have happened in the first place. And we are in these difficult times where some boundaries are getting pushed, right? And so we're being tested to see just where our rights end and authority and the commitment to public order begins. What I think is so confusing and frustrating about the whole ordeal is we were out there on a Saturday afternoon at like 2 p.m. It's not like we were, violating that ordinance at 10 o'clock at night or something like that. So, the way they were handling me, the way they were talking to me, it was very obvious that they weren't sympathetic to why we were out there protesting that day. It was very obvious that, they were looking, the arresting police sergeant was looking for a gotcha, and he thought he had me. And, the guy had me. He could have written me a ticket and walked off. I volunteered to pay the noise ordinance violation ticket, by the way. We gave Grove City $109 because I do think rule of law is important, and we want to play inside the lines. But not only to arrest a guy, but if you've seen any of the footage, or if we can send a link for your listeners, there were, at the end of it, there were 8 cruisers that came roaring up to this whole thing. It was like I was robbing a bank. So I don't, I think
it's overly excessive.
Yeah. And I think the lesson is this. We're in this delicate moment here where the answer to your question is hanging in the balance. Are we safe to exercise our First Amendment rights? Well, the only way we can answer that question, Peaches, is by getting out and doing it and establishing, in the Navy, they call this a freedom of navigation exercise, right? When you go through international waters, just because you can. Right. I think that's what we're doing out here. And that's why it's so important to show up. I would just say show up with a crowd so that there's a lot of cameras and eyes on the street. Because that's what my spidey senses told me is don't move away from the witnesses. Don't move away from the crowd.
And I'm glad you have good intuition. And what I want to point out in the Situation Room is testimony. It makes you relatable when you have this type of story and you can share it so that people don't feel isolated or alone should something happen. You mentioned ethnicity, but that is a good bridge between two different ethnicities, is the fact that you're like, oh, I get it. Never have I before experienced that, but now I experience that, and going into this new chapter, you can carry that with you. So I so appreciate you sharing that with us, the testimony, so that someone else might be encouraged. What we'll go from here, where we'll go from here is, what's one of the policies or actions you would fight for immediately that protects or strengthens the rights for everyday people?
I think the main issue that I'm focused on is economic rights, economic freedom. When I entered this race, somebody asked me what I was running for, and I started talking about, I was like healthcare affordability, housing affordability, childcare affordability. And so they were like, okay, so your first issue is affordability. What's your second issue? I said, no. Affordability is my first, second, third, and fourth issue. Partly because I think it's something that can bring us all together. We've got folks in rural Ohio that are struggling really hard. We've got folks, right down here in Franklinton and Hilltop, also part of my district, that are struggling really hard. And I think a lot of the folks up top are trying to divide us from one another and divide us from this shared frustration with this busted economy by trying to, bring up, race issues, trans issues. They're trying to bring culture and race as weapons to divide us from one another. And what I want to do is find the things that we can all come together around. I think our country and our state is ready for some healing from 10 years of Donald J. Trump and the MAGA extremism. And I think unifying around building an economy that works for all of us, not just the top 10%. I just think that's so important. Here's a crazy fact that I just heard the other day that really kind of, I think, cements just how busted the economy is right now. Do you know how much wealth the bottom half of this country owns? Like what percentage of the nation's wealth the bottom half of this country owns? You want to take a guess?
I do not. I want you to tell us so that we know.
2.5%. The bottom half of this country owns 2.5% of this nation's wealth. That's busted. That just
gain loss.
Yep. And you know why we don't build wealth in the bottom half? And by the way, my wife and I, even when we had 2 incomes, my wife's also a college professor, we were still barely getting by month to month. I've got student loans. We got a kid now. If you get, if something on your car busts or your water heater goes out, or, just, I got for my 46th birthday, I got a foot problem. I got plantar fasciitis. That was $700 of physical therapy out of pocket, despite the fact that we both thought we had really good health insurance, right? So and we're the lucky ones, in terms of, we're probably statistically speaking upper middle class. So we know that this economy is absolutely broken. And part of the reason how we get to that 2.5% number is if you don't have extra money left over at the end of the month, you can't build wealth. You're just trying to keep from running up the credit card debt, right? You're just trying to, cover your bases and, probably skipping maintenance on your house or your car or something else, just trying to make sure you're covering the basics. So we have got to completely rewire this economy so that it works for everyday folks.
And so are these things, you've been down on the ground in District 15. So what are you hearing? And are these the things that you are hearing? What are the main concerns of people down in District 15 that they're sharing with you?
Yeah, and just to be clear for your audience, because I know you cover a much wider area than just my district. So District 15 is going to be sort of the western and southern suburbs of Columbus. So like Dublin, Hilliard, we got Hilltop, we go into Franklinton, a little bit of, the south side, then we go all the way down to Grove City, Canal Winchester, that sort of arc, plus a lot of rural out to the west towards Piqua and down south through Circleville and Hillsborough. So it's a little slice of America, I like to call it. Gerrymandered all the heck, but a little slice of America. So when we got in the race, absolutely the affordability crisis was number one, but then a couple of things started happening. Number one, ICE agents started assassinating American citizens on our streets and intimidating legal residents, migrants who don't look, quote, American to some people, and thus are made to feel like they have to carry their passport when they, go to work every day. We've got that going on. And most recently, of course, we've got this idiotic war in Iran that serves none of our national security interests. But not only is it, killing innocent people, it's driving up the cost of everything even higher still. We all see it at the gas pump when we go to fill up our tanks. So, we've just got this broken economy that's getting worse by idiotic war. And, I think a lot of people are at this point just ready to absolutely turn the page on MAGA extremism. There's some people that are, going to be ride or die for Donald Trump and Mike Carey, my Republican opponent. But I think a lot of folks are ready for something different, ready for something fresh. We've got to figure out what that is, because we can't just run against MAGA. We've tried that before and we get our butt kicked. We as in the Democratic Party and the political establishment more generally, I think we've got to actually come up with some new ideas, some stuff that people can sink their teeth into and really hold us accountable for at the end of the day. My campaign pledge is that if I can execute half of my agenda, I'll put an extra $1,000 a month back in the pockets of working families simply by bringing down the cost of healthcare, by bringing down the cost of housing, by bringing down the cost of childcare, by supporting you if you're caring for a child or a parent or a disabled loved one in your home, which I know so many families. My wife and I are part of what's called the sandwich generation. You ever heard of that one?
I have heard of it. Tell us what that is.
It's basically you're caring for an aging parent while caring for your kids. So you're just getting hit on all sides there. And so we want to just take that weight off and acknowledge the fact that we live in the wealthiest country, not just in the world, but in the history of the world. America has never been wealthier, but we don't see any of it. And that's what's got to change.
Well, we see a lot of that in our communities, in the multicultural families, households, because a lot of different cultures believe they do take care of their parents. And my neighbors do. My neighbors, they're the best. Shout out to my neighbors. They are Nepali. And grandma, grandfather, their kids, everyone is there. And it's such a beautiful thing. But we need the support to be able to, make sure that that is a possibility. And we don't want mom and grandma and papa to have to figure out where they're going to live. So
Ab-
that is a big topic. But what's one policy you would prioritize immediately, and how would someone feel that change within the first year?
So what we've got to do is, number one, restore the Medicaid funding that's set to get cut in January of 2027. I talked earlier about how Republicans like Mike Carey, my opponent, passed that big, beautiful bill and $1 trillion of cuts to Medicaid. 47% of the kids in this district get their health care from Medicaid, Peaches. So this is a really big deal. And what we've got, that's just to get us back to, sort of baseline, is to make sure that that funding doesn't get cut. And another big important part for that is, rural areas tell us they need their hospitals to stay open. And those hospitals are hanging on by fingernails right now, because they just don't know where their funding is going to come from. And a lot of it comes from Medicaid. So we've got to restore that Medicaid funding. But the next thing I want to do is expand Medicaid so that everyone has access to it. If you're working for two part-time jobs that don't give you health benefits, here's your public health insurance, no problem. If you want to quit your job and go start your business, here's your Medicaid, no problem. Your family's going to be taken care of while you're going to be an entrepreneur. If you're working for a small business, the kind that typically can't afford to buy into some big expensive private health insurance plan, that's okay. The public health insurance has you covered. Every single country in the industrialized world, except for us, finds some way to make sure that everyone has access to health care. And guess what? If you have private health insurance and you love it, this is going to bring down the cost of your private health insurance, because right now, when we pay for premiums and copays and deductibles, all that stuff that is tied up in private health insurance, we are subsidizing hospitals that have to treat patients who aren't covered by any medical insurance. So our premiums and copays and deductibles are higher because we've got so many uninsured in the system. So by covering everyone, it brings down the cost for everyone. It's just basic math. So inside that healthcare reform bubble is expanding a public health insurance option through Medicaid so that everybody's covered. And in doing so, we're going to cut the out-of-pocket costs of private health insurance in half. So regardless of which side of the line you're on, you're going to see tremendous improvements by finally getting our healthcare system put back together the way it should have been built in the first place.
And that is so important, because we need healthy people, right? We live in a state where we don't have the Georgia sun, so healthcare looks like mental health care services, in our great Ohio months. Access to healthcare for everyone is definitely a human thing to do. So we're so happy to hear that, coming from you, and especially since you have the background to understand that. I want to break things down a little simple for those who might not know what your seat is going to be doing, your job requirements. A lot of times we go to the ballot poll and we say, okay, this person looks great for the role, and I'm sure I want them to do. And, I'm always asking the tough questions. I say, okay, well, what is the job description of a congressperson?
Yeah.
Woman.
That's right. So the job description is literally representative. And my job is to go to Washington to represent the people of my district. And the reason the reason it's different from the Senate is that representatives have no slack off period between elections. We have to run every 2 years. So we're basically always in the community, always trying to earn the support of our voters, so that when we come up again, in 2028, y'all know who I am, and all know that I showed up for you. So unlike the Senate, we have to keep really close with our community and not only be working for them in terms of the kind of bills that we support and the kind of bills that we draft and propose and vote for. We have to be also a sort of an ambassador between our community and the government. So it's very common, and if you're not doing this, you're kind of missing out. Although with the current congressman, he won't help you out much. I hear so many stories out on the campaign trail about Mike Carey's office won't call you back. They won't do any of this stuff. It's called constituent services. And if you have a problem with something the federal government's doing, you call your congressman. They're supposed to pick up the phone and call the federal government on your behalf or someone on their staff to try to at least get you the information you need to get going in the right direction. Right. So that's a big part of this job. And Mike Carey has not held a single town hall to meet with his voters, I think, in 4 years. So he's absolutely got his head down. He knows he's taken some bad votes that he can't look his constituents in the eyes and explain. So he's just off in hiding, hoping that Trump and MAGA is going to continue delivering him the win. So we're gonna see about that. But literally, my job is to represent the people, to help make the federal government deliver better for them, and then to help them interface both federally. And I'm also getting to know a lot of politicians at the state and local level. So if something's going on with the state of Ohio or in your community, if I don't have any power over that, I might know somebody who does. And so we're just trying to build this network where we can all help each other muddle through. We know government gets it wrong sometimes, and that's why it's so important to have a friend, in Washington in government that's going to show up and fight for you.
And absolutely, absolutely. I mean, because I was hearing from some of the people over downtown. I went to a meeting and they were talking about we don't have resources, and someone said you should be able to go to your congressperson's office because they have a specific team of people that can help you with Social Security issues. And they were like, "What? Wait, what?" And they're like, "Yeah." So a lot of people don't know what types of resources you can go to your congressperson for. So what types of things will your constituents be able to reach out to your office for?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're having issues with the Social Security Administration, with the Veterans Administration, if you or your loved one is here on a visa and you're having trouble getting the State Department to work with that, basically, if we do our job right, and we're going to have to build this organization from scratch, and I'm going to have to find out which congressmen and women do this best. Our job is basically to be a concierge. You walk into a fancy hotel and there's a man or woman there who's there to figure out you need tickets to the, basketball game. I'll track them down for you. You need a reservation at the best Thai restaurant in town. I got you hooked up, right? When the system works right, the representative is basically like a concierge. So we're going to have to build that structure up because I don't want to pretend like you're always going to be able to get me on the phone. There's going to be 800,000 people in my district. I'm going to have to build a team underneath me that has reliable access to me, that you have reliable access to. And we're going to have, a customer service team here. That's what I think is missing in the federal government right now. You walk into the Apple store and it's, unless you're there on a super busy day, it's kind of a customer service experience, right? That's what I think is missing in government right now. We need to up our game and realize we are here at the pleasure of the people. And when the people need help, we ought to snap too. I worked a lot of retail jobs as I was going through school, and having good manners and good customer service, that's just part of the job description.
Absolutely. I put in my time. I started off at a front desk of a Marriott. I got to meet Bill Marriott, and the whole thing. I ended my career as director of finance downtown. So hospitality. I like Marriott.
Yes, hospitality. That's the word.
Right? Greeting someone at the front door. We're not necessarily going to get to see Bill, or get to see the leader over Hilton on the top brands, but it is that experience. You know what I mean? Especially if you have a grand vacation package and you get there and they have that concierge desk and there's tickets to Disney right there and everything you need. I think that's important to tie that hospitality to the role, because we do want to be able to reach out. No, we might not get Don, but to get Don, if we can get Don in the services you provide and the help and the resources, is really worth it for everyone to reach out to your congressperson.
Absolutely.
So
And demand that. And if they're not delivering it, vote them out of office. If I don't deliver on this, give me the pink slip and vote me out of office. Americans need to raise the bar as to what they expect from government. And I love that's the word, Peaches, hospitality. I think
hospitality.
when you walk into the BMV, I think most of us are trained not to expect very much hospitality.
We're
But
expected to wait and wait.
yeah. I don't see why that has to be the case, especially in a country as prosperous and innovative as America.
Well, you know what? That's amazing. It did it for me for hospitality is in terms of making that mental connect that you're going to have an experience. You're seeking out something and you're going to get that resources. I think the system is broken when you have resources and you have people in need, but you can't marry the two.
That's
So,
right.
like with your hospitality experience, they're anticipating that. Some of them say, we'll leave the light on for you, or we're waiting for you.
Yeah. So is somebody at the front desk. You know where I've seen this best?
Where?
El Salvador.
Ooh,
I
we're
was
the overseas.
after graduate school, I had a consulting gig bouncing around, helping nonprofits in Latin America and Africa help measure their impacts. Because a lot of when you apply for donate for donors, for grants, they want to know what's your impact. So we were trying to help these nonprofits in South America and Africa measure their impacts better. Along the way, we got to tour a lot of different places, and one of them was this. Center for Victims of Domestic Violence. And, you turn off this, loud, boisterous El Salvador highway onto this dusty road. You pull up outside of this compound with, like, it's very common in Latin America. There's not a lot of security. So you just see tall fences with barbed wire up top, but then you walk in the door and it's like you stepped into an oasis. There's like this beautiful like waiting room. It's all in white with open air flowing through it. And there's like people in white polo shirts behind the desk to like receive you and get you situated. And there's a fountain trickling in the courtyard, off to the side. And then, for women who are coming there after what might have been the worst day of their lives, after some kind of domestic violence incident, not only is there a child care facility, so if they had to bring their kids with them, they know their kids are being taken care of and being fed lunch, right? There's a police officer on site who is trained to take reports specific to the world surrounding domestic and sexual violence. There's a counselor on site. There's medical facilities if they need to collect any evidence, if you know what I mean. So it's just like you just had the worst day of your life. You grabbed your kid and you hopped in a taxi or bus and ran to this facility, and then everything was peaceful and everything was easy, right? And I
Wow.
just thought, what a model for the United States of what, if you're a hard living person who got evicted and been living on the street and you're trying to get mental health and you're trying to get health care and you're trying to, get yourself a shower and a meal and, get some clothes to go do a job interview and get back on your feet. Why aren't we providing this kind of experience rather than, it's just, like I said, my mom and I have been there. We've been in the food pantries. We've been low, and it's so hard and it takes so much smarts to be poor, and we ought to be able to make it
People
easier for
are
folks to get on their
experience.
feet.
You can't teach that experience. That is something that has to be understood. And then, like I see as you speak, you close your eyes, you went back to that place and you remember where you were when you stood there, you know what I mean? And I've been there before as a kid and whatnot, but it
Okay.
helps to your desire to help more. And I appreciate your analogy of hospitality because you're right. You've got to have people, you're going to have your maintenance team, you're going to have in case something goes wrong. You mentioned all the different teams, but together they're working collectively for the one person and
That's
for
right.
the many, the many people. And I will correlate that with you. I was going to ask you, you've got so many people running against you in this primary in the Democratic Party. So I'm like, I was going to ask what the Don Leonard difference is, but I can see it already shining through. You're telling us about that hospitality that you're gonna get.
That's right. I think a good politician. What's that?
I said, am I missing anything? What?
No, I think a good politician has to have two sides. Number one, they got to have a little bit of fight in them, because when you get in those conference rooms, when you get in those committee rooms, when you get on the floor with a bunch of other alphas, you got to be able to fight for your constituents. You got to have, that backbone. But at the same time, you've also got to have that servant's mentality, because at the end of the day, you are a servant of your people, of your constituents. And so, confidence without ego, because I think, somebody who's there for the ego doesn't have that servant mentality. And that's the magic sauce, and that's what I wish I saw from more of our elected officials, is that servant's mentality. We've got some good ones, but we've also got some folks who think they're entitled to it. Maybe they've been there a little too long and they need to be humbled.
Hey, you're absolutely correct on that one. I can't argue at all, just because I have a lot of titles in my community, but at the core, I'm a mom and I'm a servant leader. It just so happens that someone was like, hey, will you do this job? But I'm like, I'm already doing that job. So I quickly correct people, and they're like, commission. I'm like, I'm a servant leader here to help, as you said. Yeah.
I'm going to steal that. I'm going to steal that. Servant leader. Hell yeah.
That's right. There's a difference. You know what I mean?
So you got to be a leader. That captures the other part, right? You got to be a leader. You got to be willing to stick your elbows out.
That's right. You got to roll up your sleeves and get in there, and you got those people that say, that's not my department. That's not my department. And then you've got those servant leaders that says, hey, what needs to be done? Where can I help? And that makes the difference between just leadership and servant leadership.
Oh man, I'm so glad we talked this morning, Peaches. That's great.
I'm so glad. As I minister to you, I minister to myself, and I am reminded of the great commission, the great call of the commission to be a servant leader, the higher call, and you take that with you, and then you're able to just help more people, right? We start off helping a few, and it grew, but the mission stays the same, right, Don?
That's right. That's right. We set good examples for the next little ones who are watching us and taking cues from us.
Absolutely. And it looks like we've covered my next question, but I'll ask you one more question to honor your time. And then I'm going to come off of the screen, because I want you to talk to the constituents and I want you to talk to your district. Okay. For someone watching right now who feels disconnected or maybe unsure their vote even matters, why should they care about this race?
If your vote didn't matter, they wouldn't be working so hard to steal it from you. Just yesterday, we saw that the Supreme Court is rolling back another part of the Voting Rights Act that was passed in the 1960s to end Jim Crow and all of the different tools that states had to prevent Black folks in that time period from exercising their right to vote. You remember, after the Civil War, during the period of Reconstruction, there were federal troops on the ground in the American South, ensuring that elections were free and fair. And guess what? You give, Black and brown folks the same political opportunity, their leaders are going to rise to the top. And we had, an entire cohort of Black congressmen in the House and the Senate. Back then, women still couldn't vote, so it was men. But, there was a whole cohort of them. And then the federal troops withdrew from the American South, and Jim Crow came on top and started using all this legal trickery in order to prevent Black folks from voting. So the Voting Rights Act in the 1960s was designed to roll that Jim Crow stuff back and make it illegal to manipulate our political system to suppress the voice of our ethnic minorities and racial minorities. What we have right now in American states is a situation where majority Black communities keep electing white leaders because they're chopped up into these little things, so that there's only in a state full of Black and brown voters, there's only one district that has a majority of Black and brown folks because they use computers to draw the maps. Well, somebody took that case to the Supreme Court and says you can't use gerrymandering, you can't draw districts to try to eliminate the power, the voice of Black and brown people. And Chief Justice John Roberts and the rest of his conservative court shot that down, taking a huge central pillar out of the Voting Rights Act. Here in Ohio, the Republicans in the state house have done that as well. So we've got to fight it. But all I can tell you is so many people have fought and even died to give you that right to vote. Folks on the other side are doing their best to deprive you of that. That ought to make you angry. So, there's this. You remember Groundhog Day? There's that line, "Don't drive angry." That might be true. That's very true. Don't drive angry, but go ahead and vote angry.
I've cast my ballot already. I'm an early voter. I can't wait. So I've cast my ballot for sure. But that is a good point. You must exercise your right to vote. It is a right that we have to be a citizen. It's our civic duty to do so, but it's responsible to know who you're voting for. And that's why we had you on today, Don, is that so that everyone in your network, my network, our neighbors everywhere, they can know. They've sit here and they've listened to you, they've seen you, and then they cast their ballots. They've seen other candidates that we've had on, and you can make your conscience and election sure when you go to the voting booth, right? That you did the best that you can. And we appreciate you having you on today. It was an honor to have you to do a morning session, and just to have you here to educate everybody. We're serious about education. We're serious about voting and understanding what we're voting for. And you shared quite a bit of information that people can come back to the video and to the live and watch. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. I learned something from you too. I've been trying to reinvent the wheel with this whole citizen leader thing, servant leader thing. You've been walking that walk for a while. That may be going up on the top of my website for the general.
You've got to do this. I've seen some candidates that were saying, they don't have an opponent for the primary, and they're like, don't call me that role yet. I'm not that role. And I said, I just call y'all honorable. That way I don't have to go back and forth about what role you graduate to. But for me, I will, no matter what role I obtain, I will always be a servant leader. And that will never change for me. And so that is what I am. I'm a servant and I'm a leader. And when you marry the two together, I'm just someone here to help and make educating the community more accessible to everyone.
Let's go. Let's do it.
Well, all right. Well, I'm coming down from here. It's your time to shine and it's your floor, Don. Thank you for being here with us in the HFO Situation Room.
I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure. And y'all, like Peaches said, get out there and vote. And if you want to prevent the universe from conspiring against you on a busy Tuesday, the elections are open right now for early voting at the Board of Elections. They'll even be open this Saturday and Sunday, so you can early vote until Sunday. So please, depending on what county you're at, check the times and locations. But definitely get out and get that vote in. My name is Don Leonard. I'm running for Congress in Ohio's 15th District. If you don't know where you're at, you can always go to the Secretary of State website, the Ohio Secretary of State. That's where you can type in Find My District, and they'll get you sorted out. Regardless of whether or not you live in my district, we need your help. We're going up against an establishment Democrat who has all the endorsements from the elected politicians and all the endorsements from the establishment institutions. But we're here running this race because we have the focus on the working families that we think the voters are hungry for. And we're a scrappy grassroots campaign that's raised over $300,000 just from being able to connect with folks like Peaches and get our word out. I'd surely appreciate the opportunity to represent Ohio in the state house, or I'm sorry, in the Congress in Washington, in the U.S. House of Representatives. But in order to do that, we've got to talk to people. So whether or not you live in my district, please consider heading to donforohio.com. That's DONFOR, not the number 4, donforohio.com, and smash that volunteer button. You can make phone calls for us. You can go out and stand in front of the Board of Elections, which is where I met Peaches the other day. You can stand at your own precinct on Tuesday, May 5th, on Election Day proper, and you can help us go knock on doors. We got some beautiful spring weather this weekend, and we got to talk to people. The worse our algorithms get with Instagram and TikTok, the more important it is that we get face to face with people, look them in the eye, and tell them what we're fighting for and who we support. So please consider coming out to support us. I hope that the Democrats in Ohio's 15th will consider me to be their best shot going up against the Republican Mike Carey in November. And if that's the case, stay tuned. We'll see you on May 6th.
Thank you, Don, for taking the time to speak with us today. We appreciate you for stepping into the conversation with the people. And to everyone watching, this is your reminder. Ohio's primary election is Tuesday, May the 5th. And here's something important, especially for the young voters. If you're 17 right now, but you'll be 18 by the general election in November, you can still vote in this primary. That means you can help choose the candidates. You can still vote in this primary and you can help choose those candidates, but you just won't be voting on issues or the ballot questions yet. So if that's you, this is your moment to show up, because what happens in these races doesn't stay on a ballot. It shows up in our communities, our schools, and our futures. Stay informed, ask questions, stay engaged, and as always, humanity first, Ohio always. Have a great, productive day.